Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to episode 23 of Opening Basics. I was going to finish up with the Philidor defense this week and also introduce a couple of related opening systems. So let's talk about the Philidor. E4, E5, knight F3 attacking the center pawn and defending it with D6, the Philidor. So I talked about all the main lines here already in the previous video. What I wanted to introduce on this video is an exciting counterattacking line called the Philidor counter-gambit. As another one of these openings that I can't really recommend, sort of like the Latvian gambit. I actually used to play this. I played this even more often than I played. Let's see, no, I take that back. I played them both. I played the Latvian gambit and I played the Philidor counter gambit. And I just reached a point where people that I was playing against knew as much about the opening as I did. And it just concedes a little bit too much of an advantage to your opponent if they know what's going on. But it can still be a fun weapon. So, especially in blitz, I guess. So let's put it on. D4 is the main move, and the Philidor counter gambit is F5, just counterattacking the center. And I'll go ahead and show you the main line. It's funny, if you evaluate this with a chess engine, you can walk down the main line, and at first the engine thinks white is just winning, but after a while it starts to change its mind. So if you want to investigate these openings on your own with the help of a chess engine, just take the readings with a grain of salt, because you can sometimes find yourself in a position where the chess engine didn't quite look ahead deep enough. So anyway, the main line continues with D takes E5, just grabbing the center pawn, and then black replies F takes E4, getting a pawn back, kicking the knight, and the knight goes forward to G5. And this is really a crazy looking a crazy looking main line, but this is really it. And black pushes on with D5, and we'll see a couple of the themes already in the Philidor counter gambit. One is just to build up this big pawn center. So black gets a big pawn center here, a lot of center control. And the main line continues E6, securing the square F7 for the knight, so the knight can hop in here and fork the queen and the rook. And not only that, it also shuts out this bishop. I drew that arrow in the wrong direction. Yeah, this bishop is just looking at the pawn, which at the moment is defended by the knight. So sometimes the knight will just sit here, not hop into F7, but just sit here protecting that E6 pawn, keeping this bishop out of the game. And, well, the main reply here from black is bishop to C5, not bothering about dealing with this threat at all. So this is the second main theme, is that you're often willing to give up the rook in the corner, basically the exchange, because the knight often doesn't get out. So this continues, knight F7, queen F6, so queen and bishop, coordinating and threatening checkmate. That has to be dealt with immediately. Bishop E3. And now you can take here first, or you can take here, because the knight hopping into F7 released the defense of the E6 pawn. Now the knight really needs to grab the rook in the corner, or white has nothing. And you can take this bishop. And this is the kind of position you get. It looks like you're down a whole rook as black, but of course this knight isn't going anywhere. So basically you're just down the exchange, and you have some center influence. And now that the engine has had enough time to look at it, it still thinks white is better here, but only by half a point. So what started out as a 1.5 point advantage has dwindled to half a point. So that's just my cautionary note on your engine evaluation. I would say a bigger problem, so, if you play the Philidor counter gambit, you don't mind that main line. You need to just learn how to play with your active pieces and keeping the knight trapped in the corner and trying to get the rest of your pieces out. Notice that early on in the game, the rooks aren't really participating, so they're not much of a factor. So you're going for a quick attacking win. I would say a more challenging response, if we back up. Oh, I went forward. I was trying to back up there. Let's go back to the beginning. So E4, E5, knight F3, D6 defending, D4 attacking, and F4 the Philidor counter gambit with the counter attack. I would say the more challenging response here is bishop to C4. And the problem with this is that it also looks at this f7 square, so now knight g5 comes with a big threat on f7, and yeah, it's just hard to find a good line for black here. I think if black could find a way to deal with this particular setup from white, then it might be a playable opening. But I can't really find a good one here, and I've tried a little bit. The main line here is knight to c6 for black, and then white can try the move knight to g5, and I think this is pretty dangerous. Now the threat here is serious enough that you really need to. The knight can not only grab the rook, but can also come out defended by the bishop. You can sometimes get in the move d5 here to try and shut down the bishop, but he's got the pawn already in position to support the bishop taking on d5. So your best response here is actually knight h6, just defending against the threat to f7. And it's a bit awkward. White can push on with e5, and the knight is driven back to e7. You can actually throw in the move f4 here if you want. It cuts off this knight, and then play knight e7, but it all kind of works out the same. Say you throw in f4 first, white can support the knight there with h4, maintaining some of these threats, and knight to e7, you have to run away. And, well, you can play this position, but white has a pretty secure edge here, and white has the space advantage in this line. So anyway, I just wanted to introduce some ideas about the Philidor counter gambit. It is something you can try as black, but I would say you really need to have an answer to bishop to c4 here before you go on and play this, because I think this is a pretty serious attempt at an advantage. If you grab on e4, another way to think about playing this, and knight g5 isn't so good in this case, I guess. After knight g5, you can play d5, and now you've shut down the bishop. There's no threat. So that's not so bad. So that might be a consideration, but knight takes e5. Sorry, knight takes e5 is a dangerous threat here. And what's going on here? Let's see. If you take the knight, then queen h5 check is devastating. Okay, that's the problem there. So you can't take the knight, but you can play d5. Maybe this is a better way to try. And but still queen h5. And yeah, this is a problem. You can play g6, but the knight takes on g6. And this is another important idea in the Philidor. You can develop your knight to f6, attacking the queen, so that the knight doesn't take the rook in the corner with a discovered attack. But the queen could come over here to e5 check, and you block. And actually, even better than taking the rook now is to take the bishop on e7. So knight takes e7. You can't take with the king, so you end up taking with the queen. But now this d-pawn is loose. Let's see. Bishop to g5 is played here. Okay, that's another way of playing it. Bishop to g5, going after the knight and giving up this bishop in exchange for that knight. Anyway, white has a pretty dominating position here. So the upshot of all of this is, if we go back to the beginning of the Philidor counter gambit, is that after e4, e5, knight to f3, d6, d4, and f4, the Philidor counter gambit. The main line actually seems playable for black to me, but I don't have a good answer for bishop to c4, and so that's as white I would play that, and as black I don't know what to play against it. So I gave up on this opening, but if you see it sometime, there are some ideas for you, and if you want to try it out in Blitz and see what kind of positions you can get, or if you want to explore and see if you can find an answer for bishop c4, be my guest. It's kind of fun to play around with these crazy openings. Okay, so that's it for the Philidor Defense proper. I've talked about all the lines I wanted to. What I wanted to mention next was a related line that I've seen Chess Explained play. It's called the Neo Philidor. And it's a way to get to the Hannum variation without suffering some of the disadvantages that I described in the previous video. So after e4, instead of playing e5 right away, you start with d6. So that slows the pawn down, so this pawn, so it can't charge on to e5 immediately. And the most common response by far is just d4, putting another pawn in the center. And then you still don't play e5. That would just transpose back into the Philidor. You throw in this move, knight to f6. This is the key idea. Similar to those lines in the Sicilian, where you attack the e-pawn with your knight on f6 in order to force this knight to come to c3. And the idea is that not only is it blocking the c-pawn, but it's a move that White might have rather played bishop c4, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. So going with this idea of playing a Neo Philidor, you want to get in the move e5, but you can't play it just yet because White can take and trade queens. So you play knight bd7, and now knight to f3 is the main move here. I guess, let's see if bishop c4 could be tried in this position. And bishop c4, now you can still play e5. Because, yeah, there's not the knight here putting pressure on the center. So if you take, you can actually just take back with the knight. So that's okay. Anyway, the main way of playing it is knight to f3, getting another knight out, very logical. And now you can play the move e5, and you've transposed into the Philidor. And this is the Hannum variation of Philidor, except that in the Hannum variation, instead of playing this move knight to c3 here, White played the move bishop to c4. And so if the bishop were here instead of the knight, this is a bit trickier, as we showed in the last video, more of an edge for White. But now this is pretty solid for Black. Black is okay here. White can develop the bishop to c4 at this point, but now there's no longer this worry of taking here and exposing a queen trade. So Black can continue. The main move here is bishop e7. You can also surrender the center at this point with e takes d4. So both of those should be playable options, but going for the traditional Philidor, you basically are trying to hold on to the center, and you get to hold on to it for a move longer. And let's see, knight to g5 is no problem because you just castle. So the main line just continues castle and castle. And Black has succeeded in getting his classical Philidor setup. He can even continue with c6, maybe build up with the big center. So anyway, that's the Neo Philidor, another way to get into the Philidor-like positions with slightly improved setup. Okay, let's go back, all the way back to e4, e5. Now, after e4, e5, I started out talking about the counterattacking defenses, with f4, d4, knight to f3. Oh, I'm sorry, then I should put the next move on, knight f3, attacking the e-pawn. So then the Philidor is the first of the defensive setups where you try to just defend the center. There is another way to defend. In the next video, I want to just go to the main line, which is defending with the knight. But there is one other pawn move that may appear to defend. That is the move pawn to f6. And this is known as Damiano's defense. And that's the last thing I wanted to cover in this video. It's a bit of a misnomer. Damiano did write about this defense back in the 17th century. But he wrote that it was a bad defense and you shouldn't play it. And as an example, he gave the move knight takes e5, which in fact is still playable. This move knight takes e5, it looks like a crazy piece sacrifice, but it's good for White. In fact, the best move for Black here is not to take the knight, but to play queen e7 and just chase the knight back. And then if the queen grabs the pawn here, this is a position where, let's see, the material is even, but White just has a tremendous lead in development. He's already got two minor pieces out. It's going to gain another tempo on the queen, and this is just an excellent position for White. So that's not really trying for much if that's the best you can do, queen e2. But what happens if you take the knight? So this is the main line, or one of the main lines of the Damiano defense. If you exclude queen e7, it's the main line. So the problem is that, of course, you've opened up this diagonal towards the king, and white has gotten rid of the knight here that normally blocks this diagonal for the queen to come out. So you deliver the check right away. And if you block with g6, queen takes e6 check, picks up the rook in the corner. So that's losing right away. So you can try running with the king, but it turns out that this loses as well. First you grab this pawn with check, and king goes to f7, and then bishop to c4 check. Just keep developing your pieces with check, so you get all your pieces out. And where can the king go? If the king goes to g6, that's big trouble. It's actually a mate in 11, the engine says, but just to show the idea, king here, queen f5 check, supported by the pawn, drives the king all the way to h6, and then I think d4 here is good, check with the bishop coming out, although the engine is saying that's not the fastest mate. Anyway, you get the idea. The king just gets destroyed over there. So so the move here to try and hold on for black is d5, hitting the bishop. Bishop takes on d5 check. And now the king actually is forced to g6, so you still continue with the attack, but this bishop is in a slightly vulnerable spot. It can be hit by c3. But the other point of playing d4 is the bishop, white's bishop, is guarding this f5 square where you were delivering the check from the queen. So that's very important. So what do? You're down a piece, but black's king is totally exposed. Let's see, you can play queen g4 check, but the most precise move here is actually h4, threatening to just march the pawn up and checkmate the king that way. Anyway, h6 to give the king a flight square. And there's this funny move, bishop takes b7. And that's certainly not a move you would think of, but this is a way of recouping some material. First of all, you're distracting the bishop. The bishop is needed to defend this f4 square, which is now checkmate. Now that these pawns are on g7 and h6, the king is in a mating net there. So the bishop can't take. Bishop to d6. Bishop to d6, attacking the queen is the move here. And this continues. Queen a5. And let's see. Yeah, I don't know if you would find all these moves over the board. Sometimes people will play this kind of stuff just to prove that they can win with their extra piece, and you're not able to find all of the correct defensive moves. Let's see. Knight to c6 is a try here, hitting the queen. But that just gives up the knight. You can just take the knight back and be material up. Let's see. How about knight to f6? What do you play against that? Then you can play bishop takes a8, grab the rook in the corner. It looks like at this point you're just winning material one way or another. Too much stuff is hanging, and this bishop is still invulnerable because you're needed to protect. It's needed to protect against this threat of queen f5 mate. So that is the Damiano defense. Pretty funny. Now, if you don't want to go to all the trouble of remembering those crazy tactical lines, I'm sorry, back up, f6. There's a simple way for white to play this, and you don't have to take that pawn with your knight if you're not worried. If you're worried about remembering all of those tactical tricks, although it's a fun way to play, so I would certainly do that if I had the chance. But you can just play with d4. And this just guarantees a good game. You don't win any material, but you have a lot of center influence. Actually, the best line here is to take and get this kind of setup where, once again, you can look for opportunities to throw in the queen check. And, black has this odd pawn on f6 that blocks the natural development of the knight. So all in all, nothing to be afraid of. Okay, so that ends my coverage of the Philidor defense and the related openings. And like I said, I'm going to go on in the next video and start talking about the move knight to c6. See you then.